I would encourage us all to elect positive intent. And that's more than giving the benefit of a doubt. That's acknowledging that we're all doing the best we can with the skills that we have in our current situation. We can always learn new skills. We can always do better and be better, but it takes an intentional effort to choose positive intent when you're interacting with others.
We're here today with RACSB with Michelle Wagaman, who is Prevention Services Coordinator with that organization, and Amy Jindra, who is the Kenmore Club Coordinator with RACSB. And we're talking about a really timely topic for right now, which is resilience and how we can build it in our communities. Michelle, why don't we start with you? Can you kind of give us some definition of what is this concept of resilience and why is it important right now?
Resilience is how we adapt when we face adversity or trauma or something that we experience as a threat. Some people talk about bouncing back after a traumatic experience, but I like to phrase it as bouncing forward because it's a developmental process. We have to learn resiliency. It's something that continues to evolve throughout our life. And so we can bounce forward because we can gain the skills that we need to face challenges and to overcome setbacks.
I think it just includes all those things, that ability to tolerate stress and to manage unpredictable things. It's a big deal.
We might not always be aware of where stress can come from in our lives, but obviously there have been a lot of changes in a lot of people's lives over the last 3 months. Why does that make it even more important to talk about how to build resilience, especially as we look at potentially going back to work, school, and some of our more normal activities?
Well, I think for one part is we don't often recognize what we lack until we're tested. And so those skill sets that we need to manage a pandemic, we're learning as we go. But if we don't have a baseline for learning, we are even in a worst case scenario. If you consider even learning new skills, it's hard to learn those when you're under duress. And right now, a lot of people are under duress. And so promoting as many healthy activities and promoting as much as we can to support resilience becomes even more important during times of crisis and struggle.
That's a good point. Some of the material that we spoke about for the print piece, which you can find in the June edition of Fredericksburg Parent and Family Magazine, available in the community, but also online at fredericksburgparent.net. And Michelle, some of what we talked about for that piece talked about the difference between learning brain and was it survival brain? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's a helpful concept for parents to have right now.
It's called brain states, and it's based on the hand model from Dan Siegel. So if you think of your hand as a brain, right? So down here we've got our brain stem, and then we have our limbic system, our emotional brain tucked under, and then our prefrontal cortex. We fold it over, so it kind of looks a little bit like a brain. And when we're stressed or anxious or feeling traumatic things going on, we flip our lids, kind of lose it, right? And so the distance between our prefrontal cortex, that's where we problem solve, we make decisions, and our survival brain is increased. And so it takes longer for us to get back into that safe zone. So when we're in our survival brain, that's our fight, flight, or freeze. And if I don't feel safe and connected, I can't learn. And so right now we're all experiencing periods where we don't feel safe. And because they've termed it social distancing, we don't feel connected. And so that's important to recognize where we are ourselves and the individuals we're working with. Where are we in our brain states? Are we able to learn, to problem solve? And if we're seeking safety, we can't do that.
I think that sometimes understanding where everybody else is coming from can help a lot in a situation like this. And we've all experienced lockdown ourselves within our own homes, with our own families. But as we start to go back to group activities, whether it's school or work or camps, can we talk a little bit about the different ways that trauma may have manifested because of the pandemic in our community? I mean, every household may have experienced this differently, whether it's the loss of a job or just a change of routine. But what are some of the, as people who work in the community, what are some of the sources of trauma that we should all be aware of?
Yeah. Well, I think in one part is to recognize that trauma is an individual experience. So somebody could lose a job in one household, and in another household, they could lose a job, and it may not have the same impact on that family. And so that's important, is to recognize that how we experience the world around us is going to be very individualized. I think the more you're seeing kind of that cut off from the world, we're going to see an increase in the response and reaction with anxiety and fear. When we feel connected, when we feel like we have a village to support us, we're more able to manage the threats that are around us. But when we're pulling back and we're tucking in and we're losing a lot of those connections, we see an increase in those fear and anxiety responses that lead to interpreting our experiences as trauma. And so that, to me, when we talk about trauma or adversity, it's really important. Even in the same household, you can have siblings that can experience adversity very differently and come out with a completely different perspective on what that experience did for them. And some will become more resilient. Others, it will be defined as more of a trauma for them.
In my household, I have 2 middle schoolers. One was, woohoo, no more school. Like, this is great. Fortnite all day. And so he's thriving. He's like, this is awesome. And then my older child, she's grieving. She's grieving the loss of the transition from graduating 8th grade, the 8th grade formal, 8th grade picnic, the chorus trips, and those friendships, because her friends are going to different high schools. And even though they have social media and they have FaceTime, all these things to connect, she's still grieving those loss of relationships. And it's yes, as Amy said, it's individualized. We look at isolation as a warning sign for suicide. We look at that loss of connection and relationships. We talk about the roles of schools and all that they do. It's so much more than just education. It's that routine, it's expectations, it's boundaries, it's social relationships, it's a caring and capable adult who's checking in on me, that wants me to succeed. It's hot meals. There's so many things that people have lost through this, and we had to move quickly, right? This is uncharted territory, and it was a quick transition, a quick upending of our routines in our lives. And families are facing a lot of struggles. It's employment. It's maybe a reduction in wages. So can I afford my rent? Can I afford our utilities? How do I balance still working and providing digital learning and homeschool for my children? If I'm an essential worker, the stress of that, of going to the work, if I'm a front lines, first responders, or our grocery store, our delivery people, just the added stress of that. And then not knowing, is it safe to go to the store to get the needs? So, my babies need formula, they need diapers. Is it safe to me to go get there? Or if it's, all out, how am I going to provide for my family? And kids absorb, they see the stress that parents and caregivers have, and they absorb that and take that in as well. So that can impact the children and their development and their emotions right now as well.
And that brings up something that is also talked about in the print piece, which is this concept of adverse childhood experiences. Or can you talk a little bit about what those are and why it's important to be aware of them?
So the adverse childhood experience, the original study occurred in the 90s. And what they learned is that the original study focused more on household dysfunction. So it looked at household dysfunction and abuse and neglect. And what it discovered is that over time, toxic stress creates or correlates with health conditions, adverse health conditions. And what they've learned since is that toxic stress can be a variety of things. It doesn't have to occur in a household. It can occur intergenerationally. It can occur as a result of our cultures and racism and other elements that create toxic stress. Stress can be good. We need stress to grow. It helps us change. It helps promote growth. But too much stress becomes toxic to our system, and it stunts our growth, both emotionally, mentally, and even physically. We can have impacts from toxic stress. It's like the idea of when a child is learning to walk, and as they toddle around, if a helicopter parent keeps swooping in and picking them up so they never fall, well, the child doesn't learn. And so that stress of falling and that fear of falling, we need some of that to realize, oh, I can fall and I can get back up. But then if we don't get any encouragement or nurture and while we're falling, it becomes adverse. And we don't want to even try because we might really get hurt and we don't have the support we need. So stress is good, but too much of it becomes toxic to our system. Or if we don't have the right supports in place, that toxic impact can really hurt us.
So protective factors are key. Relationships, capable parents and caregivers, not only that are caring, but have the skills to do, to meet those needs of the children or adolescents. Structure, we like routines, we like knowing what to expect. Consequences don't mean discipline, but it means learning, kind of a cause and effect. If I do this, these are the consequences, good or bad, and having that opportunity. Strong relationships, we talk about it takes a village. So knowing that in our community, our cul-de-sac, those parents are going to call my kids out. They know that they're held accountable. It takes a village that they can, but my kids also know they can go to those neighbors in times of need. So building relationships, a sense of control, and that's hard for kids, especially little ones, but giving them choices, allowing them to learn and have some sense of control. So my favorite is, those outfits, like my kid dressed themselves today and you can tell, right? But that gave them a sense of control. It also helps with their sense of identity, to identify who they are. What do they want to be? The sense of belonging is big. Who am I part of? This teams, sports teams are huge in this area because you have relationships, you have a sense of belonging, you have a sense of purpose, you have a culture, you have accountability within teams. So knowing that I'm safe, who's going to help keep me safe? Positive thinking, that I can make a difference, that what I do matters, is also important to building resilience.
Can you talk about some of the ways that RACSB works in our community to try to build awareness of this need to build resilience and also of the effect that trauma can have?
The Rappahannock Area Community Services Board is a trauma-informed and trauma-supported organization. We have spent several years bringing in trainers, having trained the trainers. So all of our new employees, every staff member goes through a trauma awareness training. So our therapists, our physicians, our case managers are prepared to meet you and where you are and to help identify how to best support you. For the greater community, we offer a number of trainings around adverse childhood experiences and how do we build self-healing communities, as well as community resilience. So how, because we want people to be informed, right? So we got to build that knowledge, then what's next? And, we're seeing a lot of that in our community right now. Like, we're learning, we're listening. Well, what's next? What are those action steps? How do we help change structures and systems to be more trauma informed and trauma aware? The thing about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, is that they're common. So most of us have some sort of adversity that we carry with us from our past. And ACEs don't stop when we turn 18. Just because it says adverse childhood experience, it doesn't mean that it ends there. We all face adversity throughout our lives. So acknowledging that, and we all have the ability to affect change. Just because something happened to me as a child or my parents doesn't mean that I have to repeat the cycle. That intergenerational transmission, through knowledge and action, we can break that cycle and change it. So we can foster a community of resilience, which when we combined community resilience with individual resilience, we can have a thriving community.
What are some things we can do in our own homes to foster this conversation about resilience and awareness of our own emotions within our own families?
I like the phrase, if you can name it, you can tame it. I know that's one that we've used in trainings, teaching children to have language for what they're experiencing, and to give them the right to express those feelings. Michelle shares the example of, it's all right to say I don't want to go to school or I don't feel like going to school. Doesn't mean we're not going to go. We're going to acknowledge that we're feeling this way, and sometimes I don't want to go to work. But this is something that's good for us and it's something that's important, so we're going to do it. But recognizing that when you're feeling stressed, to set the example, to say, this is the way I'm feeling right now. It's not your fault, it's just what's going on, and this is how I'm going to manage it, and teach by example. I think also playing. Give give ourselves some outlets to manage the tough stuff. Resilience comes from good things and positive things too, not just by recognizing the tough stuff. We learn to manage our emotions by a variety of ways. And so playing and having fun together is important too.
I like to say that I practice yoga so that I bend so I don't break. Yoga is not going to help me if I'm in an automobile accident or, some traumatic situation, but it does help me be more mentally well so that I am better prepared to respond in the middle of a crisis. So we talk about self-care and pouring into ourselves. It really is important. It's not selfish because like the flight attendant tells us to put on our own safety mask, oxygen mask before those around us, right? If mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. All those sayings come together and they're true. So being able to recognize how we are, where our brain state is, have we flipped our lids, and being observant of the states of people around us, giving names to our feelings, being able to communicate around that is important. Because if I can't name it, I can't tame it. I don't know how to address it. And it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be happy. It's good to have emotions. But we want to also check in. How long are we feeling sad, right? What's the duration of that? And then maybe it's time to get some extra help.
We need a little more kindness and grace towards one another. We watched a Zoom meeting with Dr. Bruce Perry, and he talked about this back to school concept and how are we going to get back to school. And he stressed the need to meet the emotional needs of both the teachers and the students, that we can't learn unless those needs are being met, and recognizing that we're all going to be functioning under a bit of stress and need to have that support in place. And so I think for me, it's just, let's just be a little kinder, recognize that people are feeling it.